Hollow Knight Silksong is too difficult. Or at least that's what I've been reading online. Silksong has finally released after almost 7 years of waiting, to nearly universal praise. But the most common complaint that I see about this game is its brutal difficulty spike when compared to Hollow Knight. While I do agree that Silksong is the harder game, I really don't agree that it is that much harder than its predecessor. For most of the game in Hollow Knight, you are rewarded for being aggressive, almost. Bosses typically don't move fast enough, or are really all that complex to punish you for it. So if your reflexes are fast enough, you are normally able to spam away and heal up while the boss is staggered or doing some of its bigger moves. In Silksong, however, you'll die. Silksong's bosses and enemies are much more punishing when it comes to being careless. And at the beginning, I thought this was extremely harsh. But I realized that it is just Silksong's ingenious way of teaching you the lesson that Hollow Knight continually failed to teach: patience and attention to detail. Now, I'm far from a master at this game, but I figured a fun way to put my money where my mouth is would be to beat the game under the restrictions put on you during the Witch's Crest quest, which is a quest in which a witch puts a curse on you, preventing you from using your crest, or from binding. So, are you able to beat Hollow Knight Silksong while cursed? No. To even start the game, you'll need to heal up after Hornet falls down. But honestly, I don't really care. Binding is a completely necessary part of the game, as it is required to get all of the movement abilities, spells, and all of the other stuff that comes along with actually progressing through the game. So if I stuck hard and fast to the no binding rule, this video would be over right now. Instead, I just stuck to the main principle of it, which is no healing while doing any of the levels or any of the boss fights. Moss Grotto and Moss Home are the tutorial areas of the game, and so they are as you would expect them to be. The players are welcome to try and get used to the new pogo that Hornet has, and the game's stellar visuals, but the enemies don't really have that much going on. And as to be expected, I was able to clear both of these areas no problem, without any deaths. I don't know why exactly, but I was feeling pretty big after beating Bell Beast on my first try. My ego was immediately shattered after this, causing my big-ass head to crash into the earth with the force of a megaton nuke. I died 6 times in a row to the Marrowfield's platforming challenge, because I kinda forgot how to platform without the hover or the double jump. I'll be honest, the beginning of this challenge was some of the most difficult parts of it, as I had started this playthrough right after I had finished my first playthrough 100%. So I was kind of struggling with even basic mobs, as I had to get used to not using any of Hornet's tools or movement abilities again. Luckily though, I was able to bring my own. Going into Deep Docks, I got a taste for what this challenge's gauntlets are going to be like, which is to say awful. Consistently, the worst part about this challenge to me was the mobbing. Gauntlets serve as an extended combat sequence that tests your knowledge of this game's enemies, but when you are unable to heal or use tools in these sequences, they become especially brutal. There were 3 gauntlets in the game that I struggled with immensely. And the Deep Docks one was the easiest of the 3, only taking me about 10 tries. So honestly, that made me kind of worried about the suffering that was waiting for me ahead. Also in Deep Docks, you get to fight Lace, who was the very first boss that I died to. I gotta say, I really loved the Lace fights in this game, as Lace kind of serves as a skill check for the various stages of the game. The fight in Deep Docks is an introduction to the game, and its lessons that it tries to teach. She moves fast around the small arena, forcing you to stay vigilant and watch for openings. But when you strike her, it's very likely that she's going to parry you. Now, in Hollow Knight, normally this meant that they were invulnerable, but in Silksong, when Lace parries you, this is actually your chance to see what she's going to do, and if you can dodge it correctly, this is your biggest punish window for all of her fights. Lace 1 isn't really that difficult, but it does a perfect job to try and teach you and prepare you for the rest of the game and its challenges, as after Lace, you get access to the far fields, which I don't really have that much to talk about, but it's the introduction to this game's more difficult enemies that you will be encountering along your journey. You also get access to the Float Cloak, and while it's a cool reward, the real reward of Farfields is getting to meet up with Sherma again with the sprint ability. Now, remember when I said just one paragraph ago that I was worried about the suffering that was waiting for me ahead? Well, it came much sooner than I would have liked. Greymoor is a ramshackle town that shows how fucked things were even before the haunting started. What was once a simple farming settlement has been converted into a forced labor camp to collect the shedding silk falling from the sky. Failure to perform your duty meant the fearsome Moorwing would be sicked on you, and if you somehow managed to escape that, crawbugs were lurking in the shadows to attack passerbys. To ring the Greymoor bell, you are forced to face off against these crawbugs in a section of the game that goes from subtle suggestions of using your tools to a violent demand. The crawbugs can all fly, and typically hang out above your head and try to stay out of reach of your needle. This is fine, as during the run I normally try to avoid these types of enemies. But to really make sure you are getting with the program, Team Cherry put a crawbug gauntlet that is needed for progression. I don't think this gauntlet would have been nearly as bad if it wasn't for this guy.
That fucking bird that I hate!
I spent an hour doing this gauntlet, and most of it was just because of this fat fuck. They try to fly out of your reach and randomly drop down unpredictably, often causing me to take unnecessary damage. This wouldn't be so bad, but when you can get hit only 5 times during an encounter, losing 3 to 4 masks to the very first part of it caused some issues. Eventually I thought though, why am I being so greedy? And I started to slow it down and wait for my moments. And after so many deaths, was finally able to clear the gauntlet and move on to Moorwing. I finished my first playthrough of the game before Team Cherry made that update that nerfed some parts of it. Namely, Moorwing, Sister Splinter, and some of the platforming challenges. Now I, along with everyone else, am extremely glad they changed most of the double damage platforming hazards to be single damage. But I'm gonna go against the grain and say that I actually like the changes they made to Sister Splinter and Moorwing. Now initially I didn't think they were necessary, but after fighting them again in this playthrough, I realized that changing some of the attacks that are easier to get hit by to 1 mask damage makes the fights flow more nicely, especially since they are early game bosses. The one change that I am extremely happy about though, that I don't see a lot of people talking about, is the Savage Beastfly nerfs. That part in the second phase, where the boss started sending me hurtful Discord messages, and telling me to kill myself was extremely odd, and honestly, felt kinda unnecessary. Happy to see it gone. Out of all of the bosses in the playthrough, however, I gotta say the ones that were the worst were Sister Splinter and Widow. Sister Splinter is one of the easiest bosses in the game normally, but this normally involves you being able to delete the ads with the Threadstorm, or some of the tools that you will have acquired up to this point. When you are only able to use your needle though, it's kinda like watching a car crash happen in slow motion. You know perfectly well what steps you should be taking, but because I couldn't use any of my silk spells, I just had to sit there and take the damage. If you decide to do this challenge for yourself, you will likely find yourself in a lot of situations like that over the course of the run. The speed of fights are generally a little slower, and there's much more calculated scenarios causing you to often just put yourself in bad situations, and you'll just see that happen much more frequently. Widow was another moderately difficult fight that was significantly elevated by being unable to use my tools. In fact, Widow was probably the most difficult fight I had to do in this playthrough, other than some of the gauntlets, taking me around 50 minutes to get the fight down. The Widow fight involves this lady zipping around the screen spamming projectiles at you all throughout, making it really difficult to keep up the pace of the fight, and take her out without losing a bunch of health. It was during this fight though that I could feel my playstyle changing. It really felt like I was beginning to grasp the fundamentals of the game's combat beyond just knowing the boss's moveset. This playthrough that I originally thought was just going to be a masochistic experience was quickly turning into an extremely fun and rewarding experience. From this point on, I generally just started having significantly less problems of the game due to this understanding. After the Widow fight, you finally receive the first needle upgrade from the Pin Master, and you are also able to go to Eva and get your Hunter's Crest upgraded. It just made sense to stay on the Hunter's Crest after this, as I'm not going to be getting hit that much anyways, so the no-hit buff would be active throughout most boss fights. Blasted Steps and the Last Judge would be the very last challenges to tackle before Act 2. But honestly, I wasn't worried. After doing the Courier's quests, I knew the Blasted Steps like the back of my head, and the Last Judge was very intimidating on my first playthrough, but once I was able to get down the 4 moves that it uses, I don't think it's really all that hard. A little tip though, if you are struggling with the boss and just want to learn it better, is that you can use the Magma Bell to reduce all of its fire attacks in its second phase to 1 mask, just as long as you don't get hit by the Last Judge themselves. With that all finished though, all of the game's exploration would become available to me as I enter into Act 2. Act 2 is significantly easier than Act 1. And it's mostly because of the freedom and the tools that the game makes available to you, giving you a good counter to everything the game wants to throw at you. The hardest challenge in Act 2 that you'll probably experience is going to be your battle against the Citadel's rigid caste system and systemic oppression. Just like Greymoor, we get to see the Citadel's ugly underbelly once again. A legion of broken bugs forced to endlessly toil away for 60 rosaries an hour. Worst part is, you gotta pay 15 rosaries to sit down, and 25 to be told how much of a fucking piece of shit you are. My main goal was to get my nail as powerful as possible. I knew from the last 2 gauntlets that the High Halls gauntlet was probably gonna be a little intense, so I really wanted to be as prepared as possible. This meant that I needed the 2 needle upgrades that you can get. The first was easy, as all you need to do is go to the Whispering Vaults and go through a secret area to find the first pale oil, which you can do right away after entering the Coral Chambers. This will allow me to upgrade my needle to the glistening needle. The other pale oil involves doing the Taste of Farloom quest, which will take you on a journey throughout Farloom collecting ingredients to create only the most tasty of dishes. A Jello salad. My entire time in Act 2 was mostly focused on this quest. The quest will have you climb the highest peaks, brave rancid waters, and apply for a job at Amazon to make a time-sensitive delivery. I braved all of these challenges and managed to get the pale oil, upgrading my needle to the Hive Steel needle, which is the highest my damage will be able to go without getting into Act 3. Now, I had the end of the game in my sights, and the true test of my skills awaited me. I killed a thespian and danced on his corpse. I climbed through the mechanical heart of the steel monument and navigated through the high halls. I'll be honest, I was dreading this gauntlet for a good minute now, but I can't put it off forever, I suppose. The main challenge with the High Halls Gauntlet is just how long it is. By this point, I had already grown accustomed to not being able to heal. But most of these fights that I was doing, I was running a sprint. This time, it would be a marathon, where any minor mistake in the early stages could possibly mean that I wouldn't be able to get through the rest of it fine. Overall, it took me a little over 2 hours to get through this encounter. But in the end, I was able to prevail with only one mask left. The only challenging thing left in this playthrough, now, was the second lace fight, which is intended as the ultimate test of what you have learned up to this point. Lace 2 is, surprise surprise, an upgraded form of Lace 1 from the Deep Docks. I was expecting to have some issues with it, but I was able to defeat her after only a couple of attempts. I began to realize that through this challenge, I had attained a much better understanding of the flow and the combat of this game. And while it was certainly not intended, it is still very possible and viable to do a challenge like this if you just follow the game's lead and put yourself in the best position possible and stay focused. So it's kinda weird, but I realized at this point that in a video about beating the game while cursed, it didn't really occur to me that I should actually beat the game while cursed. After the lace fight, I went to go do the Witch's Crest quest, and get so that I could actually do the Cursed Child ending. Grandmother Silk is a really fun boss, but she was actually one of the easiest bosses in the playthrough, because I had already gotten this ending before I even had the idea for this video. It also feels like she's one of the only bosses in the game who was designed to actually be fought with this restriction, probably because of the ending. So, after a couple of attempts, I was able to beat her, and get the somewhat anticlimactic ending to this challenge that I had just spent 8 hours on. I think the ending is really interesting, and a fun Easter egg if you're willing to undergo the challenge of beating her while cursed. But you might be wondering who or what Greyroot is, and while I think the ending kinda speaks for itself as to what happens, I believe that Greyroot is likely inspired by the Armorularia root rot fungus, as well as the cordyceps fungus. Now, you likely already know what cordyceps is, and it's zombie ants, but Armorularia is a fungus that attaches itself to tree roots, and consumes the tree from the inside, as well as siphons the nutrients from the tree. I believe it's probable that Greyroot attached itself to the giant tree that makes up Shellwood. And now that the giant tree is likely dying from what we can gather in other dialogue, Greyroot looks to infect Hornet to move the infection elsewhere to grow and spread. Ultimately, I think that the Cursed Child ending was a happy accident for Greyroot, one with disastrous consequences, as it likely turned this common parasite into a budding new god, which, assumedly, is not very good. Hollow Knight Silksong is pretty much exactly what I wanted it to be, and more. Amazing, engaging gameplay, but also an incredible story that really showed me how far Team Cherry stands above the rest. Going far beyond just basic love for gaming, Hollow Knight Silksong shows us what perseverance and dedication to one's craft is capable of producing. This challenge has truly shown me the incredible care that went into the production of this game, and I fully recommend that you give it a try too, as it felt very rewarding from beginning to end. I'm so glad that I finally got to play this game, and if you enjoyed this video, I do plan on making another one that is talking about the game's subtle messages about industrial overreach and the disastrous consequences it has on one's environment. But I don't know when that's going to take. I don't know when that's coming out. That's going to take a lot of research, honestly. But anyways, thanks for watching.